Well, good morning. We're going to start our presentation. I'd like to welcome all of you to the non-applicable clauses, permissible exclusions, exemptions, developing a better understanding of what can and cannot be excused in an audit assessment presentation. My name is Joseph Krolikowski, and I'm the Technical Director of Perry Johnson Registrars. Couple of notes for everyone. All of our participants today are on mute. But we absolutely want to take your questions, so please use the question portion of the dashboard, and we will address questions at the conclusion of our presentation. Very common question that we get, will we be making copies of the presentation available? Absolutely. The slides will be available for download a short time after we are finished today. And this webinar and all other past PJR webinars will be available for reviewing on our website. Just follow the link on the right-hand side of the homepage entitled Previously Recorded Webinars. Our topics for today, we're going to explore what non-applicable clauses are. We're going to review the high-level requirements that apply to this issue. We're going to discuss outsourcing. And we're going to review outsourcing as it's discussed in both ISO 9001-2008 and ISO 9001-2015. We're going to review the impact of a limited scope on this issue, have some concluding remarks, and then your questions. As a special note, for purposes of today's presentation, we'll be exploring these concepts as they are addressed in ISO 9001-2015, as well as its predecessor, ISO 9001-2008. Now, these same concepts, of course, appear in other standards, AS 9100, IATF 16949, ISO 13485, but in those cases, there are sector-specific requirements. There are special rules that are applied. I would like to point out, of course, we do offer webinars on these and many other standards. Please visit our website for further information on sector-specific webinars. So let's begin with what are non-applicable clauses. And this concept, it's a new concept. And it comes from section 4.3 of ISO 9001-2015, where it states in part, the organization's scope shall state the types and products, the types of products and services covered, and will provide justification for any requirement of this international standard that the organization determines is not applicable to the scope of its quality management system. Now 4.3 goes on to state that the scope itself, including those details and justification for non-applicable clauses, be maintained as documented information. It's actually one of the few mandatory maintained documented information statements in the ISO 9001-2015 standard. Now, how is this approached in ISO 9001-2008? Non-applicable clauses replaced the former concept that was called permissible exclusions. Now, permissible exclusions was mentioned first in section 1.2 of ISO 9001-2008, where it stated, where any requirement of this international standard cannot be applied due to the nature of the organization and its product, this can be considered for exclusion. Now, the standard went on to say in section 422A that it was mandatory that an organization document their exclusions and the related justifications within the context of their quality manual. Quality manual, of course, was mandatory in ISO 9001-2008. It has now become an optional item in ISO 9001-2015. So for purposes of this presentation, we're going to be referring to both permissible exclusions and non-applicable clauses under the innocuous term exemptions. That's a term that has come to be used as meaning both, and it's a way that we can refer to these ideas collectively. So we'll be using the term exemptions for our presentation today. So in plain English, what is an exemption? ISO 9001-2008 and ISO 9001-2015 essentially say the same thing when it comes to exemptions. For the exemption to be truly justified, it has to be something that is not part of the organization's quality management system as defined by the scope. Let's dig a little deeper into this and get a better sense of how we are to understand this requirement. And we're going to begin with some high-level requirements. There's a lot of thought that's gone into this, and there's a lot of resources that we can draw from. So this page of my presentation is intended primarily to show you some of the research that was done. We have guidance from the TC 176 committee. Those are the folks, of course, that write and are responsible for the content of ISO 9001, both the 2008 and 2015 revisions. The ISO 9001 Auditing Practices Group, or APG. This is a joint effort representing both the ISO and the International Accreditation Forum, or IAF. There is content within the ISO 9001 2015 standard itself, both auditable content and guidance content. And then finally, of course, we have the guidance standard, the ISO TS 9002 Quality Management Systems Guidelines for Application of ISO 9001 2015. So we have a lot of resources we can look to for understanding a number of things within the ISO 9001 standard, including this very important issue of exemptions. So let's begin with the TC 176 committee position papers. Way back in October 2008, just after ISO 9001-2008 was published, the TC 176 committee issued two officially binding guidance documents. Now these were both in the introduction and support package. They were both considered guidance, but they were binding from the aspect of you have to follow this guidance in the implementation of your system, and the auditors have to follow this guidance in how they assess your system. And these were guidance on section 1.2 application and guidance on outsourced processes. Document numbers 524R6 and 630R3 respectively. Now, those two papers included a requirement that at the time was considered very controversial. So what, you ask, was considered so controversial? The two guidance documents had a lot of input pertaining to exemptions, many of which were well understood. But there was one item in the guidance that stood out as controversial. And I'd like to quote directly from the guidance documents. We'll begin with 524R6. Examples of situations where conformity to ISO 9001-2008 should not be claimed. In other words, these situations should include where an organization excludes a requirement on the basis that the activity has been outsourced. And then from 630R3, the intent of clause 4.1 of ISO 9001-2008 is to emphasize that when an organization chooses to outsource, either permanently or temporarily, a process that affects conformity with the requirements of ISO 9001-2008 section 721, it cannot simply ignore this process, nor exclude it from the quality management system. In other words, an exemption that is rooted in outsourcing is not an acceptable exemption, and it should result in a nonconformance during the audit. Now, as we've mentioned, this is guidance from the committee that wrote the standard, that wrote ISO 9001-2008 and 9001-2015. There is simply no getting around this requirement, this interpretation, and that was indeed enforced by the accreditation bodies when PJR went through its various audits. Now, obviously, the elephant in the room in this situation is design. And PJR has had past clients who have claimed an exemption from design and development requirements on the basis that designs are provided by their parent or sister company. These exemptions are not appropriate and should never have been accepted. There really are only two acceptable justifications for exempting design and development requirements. Either you are receiving a complete product design from your customers or from customer representatives, or you do not manufacture products based on a product design. So warehouses, distributorships, service companies, and so forth. So how, you may ask, can PJR audit something that I don't do? And this is a response that we get from auditors as well, and our clients that express frustration over this requirement. What you have to remember, though, is that we're not auditing the actual activity. We are auditing the outsourcing controls that are being applied. So what is outsourcing? Outsourcing is a key concept, and to understand it, let's go to the official definition for outsourcing. And this comes from the ISO 9000 2015 standard, of course, the fundamentals and vocabulary. Outsource is to make an arrangement where an external organization performs part of an organization's function or process. That's definition 346. Now, I want to point out the phrase an organization's function or process. That means that the organization still has ownership of the function or process, even if they don't perform it in their facility. Ownership or responsibility would be another way to understand that. And that's further emphasized by the note that appears right after the definition. An external organization is outside the scope of the management system, but the outsourced function or process is within the scope. And that's why it's so key to our understanding that an outsourced activity does not open the door to that activity being exempted from the quality system, because it is within the scope. And again, ISO 9000 is a ISO document. It's binding. These definitions are binding within the context of an audit. So what are some examples of outsourced processes? There's a number of things that an organization can outsource. And I've got a list together here of the various things that at least I've encountered in my audits, and I've tried to pair these with the various clause numbers from the standards. So calibration, probably the most commonly outsourced activity, and that as driven primarily by clause 715. Training, a lot of companies will send people to an outsourced class. They'll have a trainer come in to train on auditing or some other topic, maybe safety and so forth. That's a form of outsourcing. That's clause 7.2. Customer service. We see this sometimes if there's a facility that has a parent company, and the parent company handles all the sales, all the order entry activity. Well, again, that's a form of outsourcing. Section 7.2, or A2, excuse me. Design and development, as we discussed earlier. Purchasing, even manufacturing. We've had lots of clients that will outsource a portion of manufacturing, something like product finishing. If you send your parts out for plating or for heat treating and so forth, that would fall under section 8.5. Testing and analysis, we see this all the time. If you have a very specific requirement that you need to uphold, if you need official certification that your raw materials meet with an ASTM standard and so forth, that's a form of outsourcing. And even non-conforming product disposal. In some cases, you may have a non-conforming product that represents some issue with biological or statutory or regulatory requirements, and therefore you have to outsource the disposal of that product. All of these are outsourced processes, and all of these, if they are outsourced, require some form of control from within the organization. And furthermore, if you are outsourcing them, you would not be excluding these clauses from your quality management system. So where is outsourcing discussed then in ISO 9001-2008? Well, the primary clause is section 4.1. In 4.1, it states, where an organization chooses to outsource any process that affects product conformity to requirements, you shall ensure control over such processes. Now, what about 2015, ISO 9001-2015? Well, there's, again, there's one key place, and that's section 841. Outsourcing is now considered part of the larger idea, externally provided processes. And that's section 8.4. The organization shall ensure that externally provided processes, products, and services conform to requirements. And then there's there's some discussion of this in the annex, Annex A8. All forms of externally provided processes, products, and services are addressed in 8.4, whether through an arrangement with an associate company or outsourcing processes to an external provider. So again, there's that tie-in, associate company. Just because it's provided by your parent company, your sister company, it still falls under section 8.4. Now, again, I mentioned that there's guidance on this in other relevant publications, and I mentioned 9002. So let's see what 9002 has to say. Under section 8.4, 9002 has this. External providers could include the organization's corporate headquarters, associate companies, suppliers, or someone to whom the organization has outsourced a process. I think it's interesting to note that 9002 specifically mentions corporate headquarters by name in the list here. The Auditing Practices Group weighed in on this in their official guidance document for the scope of ISO 9001. That document indicates that outsourcing is to be considered as an input to the development of an organization's scope. So there's consistent interpretations being applied here from a number of different sources. Now, again, I want to emphasize this. When we audit an outsourced activity, we're not auditing the actual activity itself. We're actually confirming that appropriate controls have been established, and that's a key distinction. So what kind of controls do we mean? How do you control an outsourced activity? Well, in general, any methodology of control should be acceptable. Let's take a short look at a list of what could be considered acceptable. Having a contract with a subcontractor, issuing a purchase order that has terms and conditions, having email communication. You know, if you're using email as a means to stipulate what you need to your subcontractor, having your terms and conditions on your website, going to your external provider, doing a site audit and verifying that they are doing what you expect them to do. Requiring the external provider to have some sort of certification, whether it be ISO 9001 or some other relevant certification. And in some cases, even providing work instructions directly to the external provider to make sure that the steps are followed. Let's consider an example here. A company that chooses to outsource 100% of their calibration or verification activity to a laboratory. What would the auditor review in this case? Well, a number of possibilities. The contract that was issued to the calibration laboratory. the calibration records that were issued by the laboratory, the gauge labeling applied by the calibration laboratory. Now, none of that equivocates to reviewing the actual calibration activity. We're not going to the lab and saying, okay, show me how you calibrated this company's gauges. No, we're verifying that controls were applied on the front end and on the back end as well. Now, in that scenario, none of the applicable clauses from ISO 9001 that pertain to calibration or verification would be exempted. All of 715 would be considered applicable in this scenario, even though a significant part of it is being done by an outside company. Now, I want to mention website review. A lot of our clients, probably almost all of you on our call today, have a website, and our auditors and executive committee members have been instructed to review websites as a regular part of the audit process. Websites are considered admissible as audit evidence. So I want to give you a sense of what we're looking for when we are reviewing a website. First of all, does the website appropriately reflect the organization's scope? So if you've come to us and you've said that I have a quality system for distribution of tires, and we go on your website and we're seeing testing services and training services and all sorts of other activities, and all of these are mentioned as being part of your ISO certification, those two things don't add up, and that could potentially be an issue. And then also, does the website reference design activity? And the organization has been classified as no design. And this comes up, of course, from time to time as well. So when we see design activity noted on the website and the client is classified as no design, obviously we're going to call the client. We're going to say, okay, we've got you as no design. Your website says you do design. What's going on? And the explanation usually falls into one of a few categories. Corporate provides the designs. Well, we've now learned that that isn't acceptable. Well, we don't really provide design. We just want to attract potential customers by saying we do. Well, we understand the desire to grow a business, certainly, but that's not going to be acceptable either. The design classification and your website have to be aligned with each other. Again, the website is considered admissible as audit criteria and evidence. We did design our products, but all of our products were designed 30 to 40 years ago. That is an admittedly rare situation. It has come up on a few occasions. In most instances, we've been able to leave it be and then have it be subject to re-audit on subsequent surveillances. Now, I want to talk a little bit about limited scopes. Most of our clients intend for their entire operation to be included in their ISO 9001 certification, everything that they do. We do, however, have a small number of clients that want to have a limited scope, whether it is for financial or for other reasons. Where that is the case, it's possible that a portion of the ISO 9001 standard may be considered for exemption that would not have been possible in a full scope situation. So in other words, if we had a client where there was a very large foundry and a very small machine shop, and they only wanted the machine shop to be certified, in that situation, we could potentially be looking at exemptions based on what's done in the machine shop versus what's done in the foundry. So here's our example. Let's say that an organization manufactures clothing for industrial and commercial markets. For purposes of this example, we will presume that there are two primary product lines: leather goods for industrial applications and polyester goods for commercial applications. Now, remember that ISO 9001:2015 includes warranty provisions in Clause 855. Assume for the moment that the organization offers warranty returns on their commercial goods, but not their industrial goods. If that company were to only pursue ISO 9001 certification for their industrial product line, they may be able to claim a full or partial exemption from Clause 855. So again, there's a lot of what ifs here, but there are going to be some situations where an exemption rooted in a limited scope is going to be possible. Now, what happens if an inappropriate item is being claimed as an exemption? Now, the most appropriate result of an incorrectly claimed exemption is a nonconformance. We've explored the possible clause numbers to cite, and obviously we get calls like this from time to time from our auditors. You know, they're saying, okay, this is what I'm seeing. I don't think this is an acceptable exemption. And we tell them, okay, write it up. Now, you, our clients, are afforded the right to dispute or appeal an auditor's decision. Now, that's discussed in Procedure Pro 10, and our Pro 10 procedure is available for download anytime on our website. So just because the auditor writes the finding doesn't necessarily mean that you're stuck with it. We can definitely have a dialogue on the issue and try to bring in some additional insight from other members of the PJR team. Now, I do want to also share with you a new development within PJR. Just a few short weeks ago, PJR rolled out a new certification option for our clients who receive some or all of their product designs from a parent or affiliate company. Now, this new option is going to be referred to, or is referred to, I should say, as full design outsourced. Now, a company that is going to be classified as full design outsourced, there's a couple of specific things that are going to happen. Number one, the audit time is calculated in the same manner as that currently used for clients classified as no design. Obviously, it's not appropriate to add time or expense to an audit where the activity isn't performed on site. Any organization that is classified as full design outsourced obviously cannot exclude design from their system because they shouldn't be excluding it. They're responsible for it. It is part of their system, albeit by way of outsourcing. And then the certificate that's issued to such a client will indicate design as part of the scope. Now, if you think you're a possible candidate for full design outsourced, get in touch with us. We'll examine your case and we'll consider whether or not this is a possibility. In most cases, I would say it's going to be necessary for an on-site assessment to give full confirmation that this is the case. In conclusion, we want to ensure that our audit process is value added for our clients. We want to also be sure, of course, that we address all applicable requirements. Ensuring that exemptions are justified is an important part of this process. I'd like to invite you to tune in for one of our other webinars. I do a presentation called ISO 9001 2015, Approaching Your Transition with Confidence. This is an up-to-date webinar on ISO 9001 2015. It has feedback from our first year of auditing the new standard, as well as lessons learned from the 9002 guidance standard. That webinar is shown on a semi-monthly basis. We've got another brand new presentation called Statutory and Regulatory Requirements, Anticipating Expectations Within a Quality Management System Audit. That webinar will be debuting in the fall and will be shown on a quarterly basis. And we have a number of other webinars, process mapping, stage 1 audits, AS 9100, and so forth. We've got a lot to offer you. We do hope that you want to stay in touch with PJR, and one of the best ways to do that, to enable us to keep in touch with you, is to opt in. If you visit our website at pjr.com, go to the bottom of the homepage and input your email address. Once you click subscribe, you will be automatically input it into our database, and all of our blast emails that include news updates, notice of new webinars, all sorts of helpful information, we definitely encourage you to opt in. I do thank you for your time, and at this time I'll be looking at the question portion of the dashboard. Okay. Rebecca Aspinwall, and I do hope I pronounced that correctly, asks, what if you are the outsourced supplier performing a process as ordered by your customer? Well, if the activity is being done within your facility, it would apply to you. It would not be something that you would be outsourcing, and therefore, of course, you would not be exempting it. Jeff Conklin. So my company is a new ISO 9001:2015 registered company. We have some customers that have no quality requirements flowed down. Would we be permitted to exempt that portion of our business from any ISO AS requirements? We could stamp our orders on the production area, no QMS requirements. Interesting concept, Jeff. I would say, though, that if the processes that you render the products by are going to be the same, I don't think that you would necessarily be able to exclude them on an order-specific basis. That's a very site-specific question, and it would probably be best if it were addressed on-site in the context of an audit. David Yinger, when a business has insurance for assembly and/or its product, can 855 post-delivery be acceptably claimed as not applicable? So in other words, if you have insurance that pays out in the event that there's a product failure, well, that removes financial issues, but it does not lift the responsibility. I would say that 855 would probably not be exempted in that situation. Mary Cooper, if the customer provides design, would this be an exemption? Yes. If the customer is providing a complete product design, you can absolutely still exempt design. Tim Lyons, if we design our manufacturing system but not the parts, customer sends drawings, can we take exemption to 8.3? Yes, in that situation, Tim, it would be dependent on how you've defined the scope. So in other words, if your scope is manufacture of injection molded products, you would be exempting if the part designs are coming from the customer. Yes, in that situation, you would be exempting design. Adrian Brown, can we still fully exclude design and development and not have to go through clause by clause? Yes, Adrian, you're still able to take a full exemption from section 8.3. Excuse me. Sharon Perkins, what is PGR looking for with regards to justification? I have just finished AS 9100 Stage 2. This was something they found lacking. Sharon, as you're asking an AS 9100 specific question, I'm not comfortable commenting on the nuances of what might be different in AS versus ISO 9001. I would request that you contact us here at headquarters and ask to speak to a member of the AS 9100 Executive Committee. We're getting some questions on the slides. Yes, the slides will absolutely be available for download shortly after we're finished, and the presentation available for reviewing. Jacqueline Sane, we are a welding shop and we offer design assistance to our customers for their product, joint design, material compatibility. We do not design our customers' products. Would you consider this design? Jacqueline, in that situation, we do have a third option. We don't use it very often. It's called partial design. That may be applicable to you in this situation. So I would ask that you contact one of the executive committee members. We'll discuss your case offline. David Yinger, how detailed must a justification be, and must justification be in scope? David, to the second question, it has to be maintained as documented information. If it's in the same space as the scope, that's fine. If it's within a quality manual, that's also fine. As far as how detailed, you basically have to make the case as to why it does not apply. So for example, with product designs, if they're provided by customers, complete product designs from customers, then that's one sentence, and that'll get the job done. Par Bogal, again, I do hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. What to do in case if design is provided by corporate head office, which is not ISO certified? Well, in that situation, Par, you simply have to demonstrate that you have a process for interface with your corporate headquarters. You would not be excluding design, but you would show that you have a process for interface with headquarters on getting the design. John Taylor, what if the customer provides a complete design, but we make changes for processability? Customer accepts these changes. Are we still design exempt? In that situation, again, you would not be considered full design. It's possible that you would be considered partial design. Partial design is an option that we've used in some situations. Again, John, we may need to discuss your situation offline. Glenn Rudd, as a heat treat service provider, how is special process performed subject to the warranty clause of 855? Well, Glenn, special processes, I think the way that you're referring to them, that's formerly section 752 of ISO 9001-2008. That actually has a new place in the 9001-2015 standard. It's not 855. If you'll bear with me just a moment, I'll give you a clause number here. It's 851F as in Frank is the new special process clause as it's referred to. Now, whether warranty is applicable or not, that's not for the standard to decide. That is for the organization and its customers to work out. Bob Crosby, are 855F, G, H, and I of AS 9100 excludable if not performed? Bob, I would ask that you call us here at headquarters and ask to speak to a member of the AS 9100 Executive Committee. That unfortunately is not a clause, a standard that I am comfortable commenting on. I do apologize. Victor Olguin, can we claim partial exemptions? For instance, if we are not selecting and evaluating raw material suppliers, but as made by corporate, but we are selecting providers for services and non-productive materials, and we have a process for that providers. Well, Victor, if corporate is telling you who your raw material providers are, again, that would not be something you would exempt because it's coming from corporate, it's outsourced. That would not qualify for an exemption. Now, if your customer is telling you who your raw material suppliers are going to be, again, I would be skittish about exempting portions of 8.4 because, again, the input is coming. You're still tasked then with interface with the external provider and so forth. But again, if it's coming from corporate, that's not a justification for an exemption. Steve Weber, if product is designed by customers that includes outsourced special processes such as plating, can we exclude design since we have controls within the manual for outsourced processes? Steve, I think what you're asking me is if the customer is specifying that plating be performed and the plater is somehow responsible for designing the plating activity, yes, in that instance, I think you would exclude product design. Hopefully I've understood your question. Jan West, sorry. We manufacture stampings, weld assemblies, and fabricate metal products. We also design our own tooling. for manufacturing products, and we design tooling for customers. All products are designed by customers. Since we only build tooling, can we be exempt? Well, Jan, again, it's dependent on your scope. In this instance, if you are designing tooling and then selling tooling to the customer as a product, and your scope statement is manufacture of tooling, potentially that would be an issue if you were excluding design. Now, if you are if your scope statement is manufacture of stampings, weld assemblies, and metal products, and the tooling is not part of the scope, and you're designing tooling to support a customer design, in that instance, the exemption of product design is most likely appropriate. Rebecca Aspinwall. We do heat treating. Customers send their products to us to be heat treated per their specs. We have claimed exclusion before based on design. Can this still be excluded? If the customer is providing the specification or they are referring to an industry specification, Rebecca, yes, you are still safe to exclude design. Kim Garrett, we design some of our products, but not all. We buy outsourced designs as well. We are not claiming exemption for design. Should we be considered partial design? No. Kim, if you design even one of your products, that would then qualify you, or classify you rather, as full design. Partial design is only going to be applicable in a situation where there is a shared responsibility with the customer on the final design of the product. Steve Hollendak, or Hollenyak, I'm sorry, I do hope I didn't mess it up too bad. We previously used 751 and 752, excluding us from the service provision. What clause would replace this as not applicable in ISO 2015? Interesting question, Steve, and actually speaks to something else that a lot of companies, this goes back to the 94 version of the standard, where there was a clause that was specific for servicing, and companies went to great pains to point out that they didn't service or provide aftermarket service. Steve, there really is no service clause, and the intent was not to be able to put your hand up and say, we don't do servicing, we don't do aftermarket servicing. The idea is that product and service is considered the same idea in ISO 9001. That's why all of those references to products and services were put into the standards. So I would say that if you're not doing warranty or things of that nature, there are ways, 855 for example, that can be identified, but it's not really necessary that it be called out that you don't provide service on your products. Any further questions? Okay, well, I do thank you all for your time. Have a great day.